When we say we will put America first, we mean also that our Judeo-Christian values are going to be preserved. And our Western heritage is going to be handed down to future generations and not dumped onto some landfill called multiculturalism.
The Bush people were forced to send in top surrogates for the president, including First Lady Barbara and Vice President Dan Quayle. Bush himself would later campaign in the state, and oftentimes he seemed hyper and out of touch.
The other one is that people say, well, you know, you're in trouble in New Hampshire. Well, that may be, but I'm here to listen. I'm here to take the questions. I'm here to say, hey, there's a lot to do in partnership. The federal government, the state government, where you've got superb leadership, and the people themselves. And of course we care. And I you know, somebody said, gave me the analogy of a country western song about a train, hoping they see the light at the end of the tunnel's not a train coming through. And I trumped it with saying, well, if you're gonna, you remember the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band one, if you got any country music people here, if you're gonna see a rainbow, you got to stand a little rain. Well, New Hampshire stood more than its share of rain, and job hurting, and families wondering how they're going to make their ends meet. But there is going to be a rainbow out there. There's some fundamentals that are pretty darn good, and yet we've got to do better.
Today from dawn to dusk, the Buchanan Brigades met King George's army all along the conquered Manchester-Nashua line, and I'm here to report they are retreating back into Massachusetts.
Actually, Catherine, the cries are rather muted. We've had a written statement from the president himself. Chance to talk with White House spokesman Marlin Fitzwater, who acknowledges that the president has absorbed some enormous body blows, as he puts it, up in New Hampshire, and says that from now on the Bush campaign will have to pay a little bit more attention to drawing the distinctions between Mr. Bush and Mr. Buchanan.
Now is the time to take back America. If you want to join in the fight to make this country work for us, for all of us, for we the people, finally there's something each of us can do. Listen to Jerry Brown on this recent TV interview.
How can I, as somebody who's raised $18 million over the last 15 years and have been truly in the business of politics, now come on and say, okay, now we want a grassroots revolution? Well, I'll tell you, I know how the system works. I've been a part of it. And out of that experience, and having been away from it for 8 years, I've come back and said, it is so rotten, it is so paralyzed, that I think we ought to try to bring the people back by limiting contributions to $100. I am willing to cut the umbilical cord to the corrupt power that is holding our country back. I'm not saying I'm perfect. I have a lot of flaws. Everything you suggested in your question has truth to it. But if I don't make myself available with the resources and the time and the notoriety that I have, tell me, who's going to do it?
Every one of these debates, Senator Tsongas has been reading to the rest of us, and we have never done that. But the implication, if it's printed, it's true. Now, here's a Time magazine, March 2nd. One area particularly in which Tsongas would have the government take a leading role is in the creation of nuclear power plants. Tsongas calls for building 300 to 500 megawatt plants rather than the current 1,200 megawatt models. Now, I didn't lie, and maybe he thinks the Time magazine author lied, but since we have a presumption that the printed word is always true in these debates with Senator Tsongas, I'm quoting from it. Let me say one other thing. The first untrue negative ad in this campaign was run against Bob Kerrey and Bill Clinton by Paul Tsongas, who ran an ad saying that we were for a middle-class tax cut to increase the deficit of the United States, when both of us called for an increase in the incomes in the taxes of people who were upper-income people whose taxes went down in the 1980s. That was the first negative ad in South Dakota and Georgia. Who knows where else it ran, and it wasn't true then, and it's not true now.
All right, we're into free for... Hold on, we'll get to it. I'd like to chance it. We're into free-for-all time here, and we're going to let Senator...
We didn't get the answer.
Yeah, he did. Well, if we're in the free-for-all... Yeah, I'd like to say...
I'd like to try to...
Wait a minute.
I would like a chance to
All right,
respond if I can.
we're going to start. We're going to start with Senator Tsongas. Let's do this in TV sound bites, okay? Around 30 seconds per answer. If you want to talk, raise your hand, and we'll just use up the last 5 minutes that we have. Go right ahead.
First of all, the Time Magazine story, they never talk with us. It's going to be in this coming week, number one. Number two, Rocky Mountain News, evaluating the ad. Evaluating the Clinton ad, quote, misleading. Number three, I take a pledge. Let's all agree. No ads, no attacking each other, no ads against each other. You know, come on.
What about your
Let me
ad?
finish.
What about your ad, Senator?
You take
What
your
about your
ads
ad?
off. I started yesterday because you've been on my back for a long time. Put your hand up. Oh, put your hand up, Bill. No negative ads. Put your hand up.
From NBC News, Decision 92, Super Tuesday. Here from New York is Tom Brokaw.
Good evening. Voters on this Super Tuesday put Bill Clinton and President Bush solidly in the winner's circle tonight, but with reservations. At a time of great anxiety in this country about the present and the future, the only real enthusiasm about these candidates seems to be in their own families and among their hardcore supporters. This day was the toughest test yet in the primary season. 11 states for the Democrats, 8 for the Republicans. About a third of the delegates needed for the nomination. Primaries in Texas, Oklahoma, Mississippi, Louisiana, Florida, Tennessee, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island. Democratic caucuses in Delaware, Missouri, and Hawaii. And as I say, a clean sweep for the president tonight, a very impressive win for Bill Clinton, especially in the big pivotal states of Texas and in Florida. We want to show you the winners now, beginning on the Democratic side. As you can see, Bill Clinton, a native of the South, did extremely well in Texas, Florida, Tennessee, Louisiana, Oklahoma, and Mississippi. His now principal Democratic challenger, Paul Tsongas, a native son of Massachusetts, won that state, also next door in Rhode Island. And now we can project Paul Tsongas, the winner in the Delaware caucuses tonight as well. What does that mean in terms of delegates? Remember, a lot of delegates were at stake today, about a third of those needed for nomination. It's worth remembering that on this Super Tuesday, 783 delegates were at stake. You need, on the Democratic side, 2145 for the nomination. Bill Clinton picked up 429 today, Paul Tsongas 201, and Jerry Brown just 23, but Brown will stay in the hunt.
The people in the South heard the worst about me, but they saw the best. They know that the true measure of character in politics can never be perfection, because if it were, no one could pass. The true measure is genuine commitment that lasts day in and day out through failures and disappointment and defeat and setback. The true measure is rooted in a desire to do better and a belief that it is always possible to do better and that we are morally bound to do better.
And we've got to go into, that's not true.
Without royal permission, you know it's true.
Now, will you just calm down? Now, you know,
We're dying. You will let us calm yourself.
he's addressing you. Let him
You're
speak.
dying of ambition. I'm listening.
Let me tell you something. If I were dying of ambition, I wouldn't have stood up here and put up with all this crap I've put up with in the last 6 months. I'm fighting to change this country. And let me tell you something else. You do not have the right to treat any human being, including me, with no respect because of what you're worried about. I did not cause it. I'm trying to do something about it. I have treated you and all the people who've interrupted my rallies with a hell of a lot more respect than you treated me. And it's time you started thinking about that.
Although Paul Tsongas had dropped out of the race, he allowed his name to stay on the ballot in New York, site of the next big presidential primary. Polls there actually show that Tsongas had a pretty good chance of winning the primary, even though he wasn't even campaigning. Jerry Brown was busy soliciting the support of organized labor and other traditionally liberal groups.
4 years ago, George Bush spoke to the Republican convention and told the American people that he was a quiet man who heard the voices of quiet people. Well, it turned out he scared those quiet people away from his good and decent opponent, but once he got in office, he could not hear their voice or feel their pain. He left them to twist in the wind of fate. And I tell you tonight, my friends, the quiet people are going to have someone who hears their voice, who feels their pain, and who will work with them to change their lives. That's what this election's all about.
We used to have the world's greatest economic engine. We let it slip away. And with it went millions of jobs and taxpayers. Let's take a little time and figure out what happened to the engine. Let's raise the hood and go to work. Let's diagnose the problem. I can tell you before we look at the engine, an engine tune-up won't fix it. We're going to have to do a major overhaul. To help you understand how fast this debt has grown and when it grew, the green is the debt we had in 1980. The red is the debt that has been incurred in the last 12 years. We've had an enormous growth in debt.